Hey everyone, tonight we're uncovering a hidden war that raged for over 1,000 years, not fought with armies and sieges, but with sacred groves burned in darkness, ancient festivals quietly transformed, and pagan gods secretly rebranded as Christian saints. Before we begin, hit like if you're ready to discover the religious conflict they don't teach in history class, and let me know in the comments if you've ever noticed pagan symbols hiding in your local church. Now dim those lights and settle in. We're about to explore how Christianity didn't just replace paganism. It absorbed it, twisted it, and buried the evidence so well that most people today have no idea they're still practicing rituals that are thousands of years older than Christ himself. The sacred grove stands in twilight silence, ancient oaks reaching towards stars that have watched this ritual for 1,000 years. Their bark bears scars from countless ceremonies, grooves worn smooth by the hands of Druids who understood that gods lived in wood and stone, in running water and the turning seasons. Tonight, the last priestess raises her bronze sickle to cut the mistletoe, as her grandmother did, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. She does not know that Roman legions march north, carrying with them a new god who demands the destruction of all others. This is Europe before Christ, a continent alive with gods. In the misty highlands of Scotland, warriors paint their faces blue and dance around fires that have burned since the world was young. They call upon the Morrigan, the crow goddess who feasts on battlefields, and Lugh of the Long Arm, master of all skills. Their druids commit no sacred knowledge to writing, for they believe wisdom must live in human memory, passed mouth to ear through 20 years of training. They study the flight of birds, the patterns of clouds, the whispers of wind through sacred trees. They know which herbs heal and which kill, when to plant and when to harvest, how to speak with the spirits of the dead. South, in the marble temples of Athens, mysteries unfold that promise rebirth beyond death. In the underground chambers of Eleusis, initiates descend into darkness, clutching ears of wheat, symbols of Persephone's return from the underworld. They drink the kykeon, a sacred brew that opens the doors of perception, and emerge transformed, carrying visions they are forbidden to speak. These mysteries have persisted for 1,000 years, promising salvation to all who complete the rites, slave and emperor alike. The goddess Demeter weeps for her lost daughter, and in her tears, the Greeks find meaning in suffering, hope in darkness, and the promise that death is not the end. In Rome, the eternal flame burns in the temple of Vesta, tended by 6 virgin priestesses whose purity maintains the sacred fire that protects the empire. Should the flame die, Rome itself will fall. The Vestal virgins live as goddesses among mortals, their word carrying the weight of divine law. They alone among Roman women can own property, make wills, and speak in court. Their sacred duty binds them for 30 years, 10 years learning, 10 years serving, 10 years teaching the next generation. Only then may they marry, though few choose to abandon their divine status for the mortal bonds of marriage. Beneath the streets of Rome, in caves carved from living rock, soldiers of the god Mithras gather in lamplight. They have sworn oaths of secrecy and brotherhood, these men who serve the unconquered sun. Through 7 grades of initiation, they rise from raven to father, each step revealing deeper mysteries. They feast on bread and wine, sacred foods that transform them into vessels of divine light. The weak flesh dies. The solar spirit is reborn. In darkness, they find illumination. In brotherhood, they find strength to face the chaos of an empire always at war. The Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine worship Wotan, the one-eyed god who hangs himself from the world tree to win the secrets of the runes. Their warriors believe death in battle earns a place in Valhalla, where they will feast and fight until the world ends in fire and flood at Ragnarök. They carve runes into sword blades and spear points, each symbol carrying the power of the gods. Their shamans enter trances that last for days, their spirits traveling the 9 worlds that spiral around the cosmic ash tree. They speak with wolves and ravens, the gods' messengers who fly between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. In the frozen forests of the Baltic, the last sacred fires of Europe burn in oak groves where Lithuanian priests maintain rituals older than memory. They worship Pakunas, the thunder god who splits the sky with his iron hammer, and Jamina, the earth mother who births all life. Their sacred serpents coil around ancient altars where amber beads catch firelight like captured sunlight. These people will resist conversion longer than any others, their sacred flames burning until the 14th century after Christ. Across the vast steppes of Slavic lands, spirits dance in every forest clearing, every babbling brook, every crossroads where 3 paths meet. The Domovoy guard households, while Rusalka sing in rivers, luring the unwary to watery graves. Baba Yaga, the witch who lives in a hut on chicken legs, tests heroes with riddles and gifts them with wisdom or death. These are not gods to be worshipped in temples, but forces to be negotiated with, bargained with, honored with bread and salt and silver coins. The old gods demand sacrifice, but they give abundance in return. They dwell in sacred spaces where heaven touches earth, on mountaintops where eagles soar, in caves where earth spirits whisper secrets, in groves where every tree houses a dryad soul. These are not distant deities ruling from golden thrones, but intimate forces woven into the fabric of daily life. The farmer knows which field spirits require offerings before planting. The hunter leaves the first kill for the forest gods. The mother births her children under the protection of goddesses who understand the pain and joy of creation. Every hill and stream, every ancient stone and weathered oak carries its own sacred story. The landscape itself is a living temple where divine forces flow like underground rivers, surfacing in holy wells and sacred springs that heal the sick and grant the wishes of pilgrims who leave coins and flowers and whispered prayers. The priestesses of these old gods wield power that transcends mortal authority. In Celtic lands, the Druids serve as judges, teachers, healers and keepers of cosmic law. Their word can stop armies in their tracks, for even kings bow before those who speak with divine authority. They know the secret names of gods, the proper rituals for every season, the herbs that cure madness, and the words that bind oaths beyond breaking. In Greece, the Pythia sits on her tripod at Delphi, breathing vapors that rise from cracks in the earth, speaking prophecies that shape the fate of nations. Kings and commoners alike journey to hear her riddling words, for Apollo speaks truth through her lips, even when that truth comes wrapped in mystery. The oracles and priestesses, the druids and shamans, the keepers of flame and tenders of grove, they form a vast network of sacred authority that spans the continent. They study the stars and read the future in the flight of birds, in the patterns of smoke rising from burnt offerings, in the shapes clouds make as they drift across autumn skies. But their greatest power lies in their understanding of the sacred cycles that govern all life. They know when the veil between worlds grows thin, when the dead return to visit the living, when the gods themselves walk among mortals in disguise. They celebrate the turning of the seasons with festivals that honor the eternal dance between light and darkness, life and death, planting and harvest. At Samhain, the Celtic New Year, they light bonfires to guide the spirits of the dead home for one night of reunion with the living. At Beltane, they drive cattle between twin fires to purify them for the summer pastures, and young couples leap over flames to ensure fertility and good fortune. The wheel of the year turns through 8 sacred festivals, each one honoring a different aspect of the divine cycle. In Rome, the Saturnalia transforms the social order for 7 days each December. Masters serve slaves, gifts flow freely, and the Golden Age returns briefly to a world grown hard with empire and a war. The Romans feast and drink and remember a time when Saturn ruled in peace, when the earth gave freely of its abundance without need for human toil. These are not primitive peoples bowing before stone idols, as later Christian chroniclers will claim. These are sophisticated civilizations with complex theologies, intricate rituals, and profound spiritual insights. Their gods embody the forces of nature and the depths of human psychology. Their myths encode wisdom about the cosmos and humanity's place within it. Their festivals celebrate the sacred rhythms that connect mortal life to divine purpose. The Eleusinian Mysteries promise initiates that death is merely a doorway to greater life. The Mythic grades teach soldiers to transform their animal nature into solar divinity. The Celtic Druids preserve in living memory the entire history and lore of their people. The Germanic shamans journey to other worlds and return with healing songs and prophetic visions. This is the spiritual landscape of Europe in the centuries before Christ, a tapestry of traditions woven from countless threads of wisdom, each culture contributing its own understanding of the sacred. Gods and goddesses number in the thousands, each one embodying some aspect of divine mystery, each one demanding honor and offering blessing in return. Yet already, seeds of change blow on Mediterranean winds. In a distant province called Palestine, a Jewish preacher named Jesus speaks of a kingdom not of this world. His followers carry his message north and west, along the roads built by Roman legions, into lands where ancient gods have ruled since time began. The old priests do not yet know they stand at the end of an age. The sacred fires still burn. The grove gods still answer prayers. The mysteries still transform those who dare descend into their depths. But change comes like winter, slow at first, then sudden and complete. The last Druids gather mistletoe as their fathers did, not knowing they are the last. The final Vestal Virgin tends her flame, unaware that it will soon be extinguished forever. The priests of Mithras break bread in their underground temples, not knowing that darkness approaches, that no amount of solar light can drive away. This is pagan Europe in its final flowering, magnificent, diverse, alive with 10,000 gods. Soon the temples will fall silent, the groves will burn, the sacred wells will be blessed in a new god's name. The old stories will be forgotten or twisted into tales of demons and devils. The ancient wisdom will be branded as witchcraft and driven underground. But not yet. For now, the gods still walk among their people, and the sacred fires burn bright against the gathering dark. The cross casts no shadow in the flickering lamplight of the Roman catacomb. Here, beneath the city, where emperors burn incense to Jupiter and citizens pour wine for their household gods, a different kind of worship takes root in darkness. The faithful gather in chambers carved from tufa stone, their voices echoing off walls painted with symbols that would mean death if discovered by the wrong eyes. A fish drawn in the dust, a shepherd carrying a lamb. Simple images that carry revolutionary power. This is Christianity in its infancy, not the religion of cathedrals and crowned kings it will become, but a dangerous cult of slaves and outcasts who dare to claim their crucified teacher lives still. In the dusty streets of first-century Jerusalem, where Roman eagles cast shadows over the Temple Mount, a Jewish preacher named Jesus walks among the dispossessed. He speaks of a kingdom where the last shall be first, where the poor inherit the earth, where Caesar's coin bears Caesar's image, but souls belong to God alone. His words carry sedition wrapped in parables, revolution disguised as spiritual teaching. The message spreads like wildfire through tinderbox communities, slaves who dream of freedom, women denied voice in synagogue and forum, the sick who find no healing in marble temples, the poor who watch priests grow fat on temple taxes, while children starve in the streets. When the Romans nail Jesus to wood and stone, his followers do not scatter as expected. Instead, they gather in upper rooms and speak of resurrection, of death defeated, of a God who chooses suffering over power, love over conquest. This is heresy to Jewish authorities who await a warrior Messiah. This is treason to Roman officials who demand worship of the divine emperor. Yet the message spreads. Paul of Tarsus walks the roads that bind the empire together, his feet carrying a message that will remake the world. This is a man who has seen visions that burn like lightning, who speaks in tongues that angels understand. He plants seeds of faith in synagogues and marketplaces, in the homes of merchants and the hovels of the poor. But Paul is no fool. He knows the hearts of his listeners, knows the spiritual hunger that gnaws at souls grown weary of gods who demand sacrifice but offer no salvation. In Corinth, where temple prostitutes serve Aphrodite and mystery cults promise rebirth for gold, Paul speaks of love that costs nothing but transforms everything. In Athens, where philosophers debate the nature of existence beneath marble columns, he preaches a God unknown to their pantheon, a deity who needs no temple because the whole world is his sanctuary. Paul adapts his message like water finding its level. To Jews, he quotes scriptures and speaks of prophecy fulfilled. To Greeks seeking wisdom, he offers divine mystery deeper than any philosophical system. To Romans impressed by power, he presents a God who conquered death itself. The old religions offer many paths to many gods. Paul offers one path to the God above all gods. In the port cities of the Mediterranean, Christian communities take root like seeds in fertile soil. Antioch, where followers of Jesus first call themselves Christians. Ephesus, where Paul's preaching empties the silver markets as converts abandon their Artemis shrines. Alexandria, where Christian scholars begin weaving Greek philosophy into Hebrew revelation, creating a synthesis that will outlast the empire itself. These early Christians meet in houses, not temples. They share bread and wine as Jesus did, transforming simple meals into sacred mysteries. They care for widows and orphans, bury the dead when plague strikes, visit prisoners condemned to die. They live their beliefs in ways that shame the established religions, where priests grow rich, while the poor starve outside temple gates. But Christianity, in its first centuries, is not the unified faith it will appear to later generations. In hidden rooms and secret gatherings, different groups develop different understandings of the Christ mystery. The Gnostics speak of secret knowledge that liberates souls from the prison of flesh. They tell of a divine spark trapped in matter, awaiting awakening through hidden wisdom. Their Christ is a teacher of mysteries, not a sacrifice for sins. Other communities preserve the words of Mary Magdalene, whom they call the apostle to the apostles. In their Gospels, she receives visions that surpass even Peter's understanding. Women lead worship, prophesy in tongues of fire, heal the sick with laying on of hands. These communities remember a Jesus who honored the feminine divine, who spoke with the Samaritan woman at the well and allowed Mary to anoint his feet with precious oil. The Ebionites, Jewish Christians who never abandoned the law of Moses, see Jesus as a great teacher and prophet, not the divine Son of God. They keep kosher, observe Sabbath, circumcise their sons. For them, the Christ message fulfills Judaism, not replaces it. Each community treasures its own gospels, its own traditions, its own understanding of what it means to follow the crucified and risen Lord. They write letters and circulate stories, creating a vast library of Christian literature that tells not one story, but many. Yet even as Christian communities multiply across the empire, they face persecution that burns like fire in the night. Nero blames them for the great fire that consumes Rome, turning Christians into human torches to light his gardens. Their screams echo through the imperial palace as they burn for crimes they did not commit, dying for faith they will not renounce. Under Domitian, Christians who refuse to burn incense before the emperor's statue face exile or death. The old man John, last of the apostles, writes his apocalyptic visions on the island of Patmos, seeing in symbolic language a cosmic war between the Lamb and the Beast, between the kingdom of God and the empire of Caesar. During the persecutions of Decius and Diocletian, the faithful hide in caves and catacombs, celebrating communion by lamplight while soldiers search the streets above. They develop secret symbols, the fish whose Greek letters spell Jesus Christ, God's Son, Saviour, the anchor that represents hope, the dove that carries the Holy Spirit. Some break under torture, offering incense to Roman gods to save their lives. Others stand firm, singing hymns as lions tear their flesh in the arena, praying for their executioners even as flames consume their bodies. The martyrs become living proof that their faith offers something the old gods cannot: strength to face death without fear, love that conquers hatred, hope that survives the destruction of the body. The blood of martyrs becomes seed of the church. For every Christian who dies in the arena, 10 more are born in the quiet moments when Romans witness such courage and ask themselves what power could inspire such sacrifice. Women play crucial roles in this underground church. They open their homes for worship, risking torture and death. Phoebe carries Paul's letter to Rome, trusted with theological treasures. Priscilla teaches Apollo, the eloquent preacher, correcting his understanding of baptism. Lydia, the purple merchant, supports Paul's ministry with her wealth and influence. In many Christian communities, women prophesy and lead worship, baptize new converts, and distribute communion. They preserve oral traditions and copy manuscripts, serving as living libraries of faith in an age when few can read. But as Christianity spreads, it encounters the sophisticated theological systems of Greek philosophy and mystery religions. Christian intellectuals begin borrowing concepts and language from these traditions, explaining the Christ event in terms educated converts can understand. From Platonism, they adopt ideas about the soul's immortality and its relationship to divine reality. From Stoicism, they take concepts of universal law and rational order. From the mystery religions, they borrow imagery of death and rebirth, of initiation into sacred knowledge, of divine beings who suffer for humanity's salvation. This synthesis creates a Christianity more appealing to educated pagans, but it also begins to change the faith itself. Simple stories of a Jewish teacher become complex theological treatises. The intimate house church worship evolves into elaborate liturgies. The equality of early Christian communities gives way to hierarchical structures borrowed from Roman administration. In Alexandria, Christian scholars like Clement and Origen create an intellectual Christianity that rivals the best pagan philosophy. They speak of the Logos, the divine word that shapes all reality. They develop theories of biblical interpretation that find hidden meanings in every verse. They create systematic theologies that explain how the one God can be Father, Son, and Holy Spirit simultaneously. Yet even as Christianity gains intellectual respectability, it maintains its appeal to the masses. Unlike the mystery religions with their expensive initiations and exclusive memberships, Christianity offers salvation to all, rich and poor, slave and free, male and female, Jew and Gentile. The Christian message spreads along trade routes and military roads, carried by merchants and soldiers, slaves and freed men. It travels to Britain with Roman legions, to India with Syrian traders, to Ethiopia with court officials who hear Philip preach in the desert. Each new culture receives and transforms the message. In Syria, Christians develop a mystical tradition that seeks direct union with God through prayer and fasting. In Egypt, hermits flee to the desert to wrestle with demons and angels in the wasteland where Christ himself was tempted. The church grows not through conquest, but through conversion, not by the sword, but by the cross. It offers hope to the hopeless, dignity to the despised, meaning to lives ground down by the machinery of empire. By the end of the 3rd century, Christians may number 10% of the Roman population. They have survived 3 centuries of persecution, produced libraries of theological literature, established communities from Spain to Persia. They have bishops and deacons, martyrs and confessors, scholars and mystics. Yet they remain, in Roman eyes, a dangerous superstition, a foreign cult that weakens traditional values and threatens the cosmic order that keeps the empire strong. Roman officials note with alarm that Christians refuse military service, avoid the games and theatres, abstain from civic festivals that honour the gods who protect the state. The old gods demand public worship, community celebration, visible acknowledgement of their power. The Christian God asks for something far more dangerous, the transformation of the human heart. Where pagan religion supports the existing order, Christianity imagines a new order where justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. In underground churches, Christians sing hymns that speak of Christ's return, when the proud will be humbled and the humble exalted, when every tear will be wiped away and death itself will die. They speak of a kingdom not built with hands, a city whose builder and maker is God. This is the revolutionary power that burns at the heart of early Christianity, not the promise of better sacrifices or more powerful magic, but the vision of a world transformed, a creation renewed, a humanity redeemed. The empire that crucified their Lord will kneel before their altars. The temples that now exclude them will crumble into dust. The gods who demand their death will be forgotten like whispers on the wind. But first, Christianity must conquer not through force but through faith, not through armies, but through the quiet power of truth, lived out in daily love. The fire spreads in darkness, carrying light to eyes that have never seen, hope to hearts that have never dared to dream, life to souls that have tasted only death. The revolution has begun. The Chi-Rho gleams on Constantine's shield as his army crosses the Tiber in the grey dawn of October 28, 312 AD. Above the mist, eagles soar where the night before he saw a cross of light blazing against the stars, accompanied by words that echo still in his mind. In this sign, conquer. The emperor who will remake the world carries into battle not the standards of Jupiter or Mars, but the symbol of a crucified Jewish preacher. By sunset, the waters of the Tiber run red with the blood of Maxentius and his legions. The Battle of Milvian Bridge ends not just a civil war, but an age. The persecuted have become the victorious. The Lamb has devoured the eagle. Constantine kneels in his command tent as Christian priests pour blessed water over his battle-scarred head. The same hands that signed death, warrants for Christians, now receive their sacraments. The same lips that once praised Sol Invictus now whisper prayers to the Christ. Around him, pagan senators watch in stunned silence as the architecture of empire shifts beneath their feet. This is the moment when Christianity ceases to be a revolutionary cult and becomes an imperial religion. The cross that once marked rebels for crucifixion now crowns the standards of Roman legions. The God who chose powerlessness now commands the most powerful army on earth. But Constantine is no fool. He understands that hearts change more slowly than laws, that the souls of his subjects cannot be conquered with swords alone. The transformation he envisions requires subtlety, patience, and a willingness to blur the lines between old and new until no one remembers where one faith ends and another begins. The Edict of Milan, signed in 313 AD, grants tolerance to all religions, but everyone understands which religion the emperor favors. Gold flows from imperial treasuries to build churches while pagan temples see their subsidies quietly withdrawn. Christian bishops receive honors and estates, while pagan priests find themselves excluded from imperial councils. Yet Constantine moves carefully, like a master chess player who sees moves others cannot imagine. He does not immediately ban the old religions, for that would provoke rebellion and civil war. Instead, he begins the slow work of transformation, allowing paganism to wither on the vine, while Christianity grows strong in imperial sunlight. The genius lies in synthesis, not destruction. Where Christian theologians see irreconcilable differences between Christ and the old gods, Constantine sees opportunities for fusion. He maintains his position as Pontifex Maximus, high priest of the Roman state religion, even as he favors the Christian god. He continues to mint coins bearing images of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, while Christian artists begin depicting Christ with solar halos. The birthday of Sol Invictus, December 25th, becomes the celebration of Christ's nativity. The spring festival of Ostara, with its symbols of eggs and rabbits representing new life, transforms into the celebration of resurrection. The Saturnalia's gift-giving and role reversals blend seamlessly into Christmas traditions that will outlast the empire itself. Christian bishops, many of whom spent their youth hiding in catacombs, suddenly find themselves dining with senators and advising emperors. They adapt quickly to their new role, trading simple robes for silk vestments, humble house churches for marble basilicas. The faith that once proclaimed blessed are the poor now accumulates wealth that rivals the treasuries of kings. But with imperial favor comes imperial control. Constantine convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, summoning bishops from across the empire to resolve theological disputes that threaten Christian unity. In a grand palace overlooking Lake Ascania, 300 bishops debate the nature of Christ, while the emperor watches from a golden throne. The Arian controversy splits the church like lightning splitting an oak. Arius teaches that Christ, though divine, remains subordinate to the Father, created, not begotten, divine, but not eternal. His opponents, led by Athanasius, insist that Christ shares the Father's essence completely, that anything less makes salvation impossible. Constantine cares little for theological subtleties. What matters is unity, order, the stability of an empire that cannot afford religious civil war. The bishops who gather at Nicaea understand that their debates have consequences beyond theology. The empire has chosen Christianity, but which Christianity will the empire choose? The Nicene Creed emerges from these debates like a sword forged in fire, proclaiming Christ as true God and true man, begotten not made, of one substance with the Father. The words will echo through centuries, defining orthodox belief and marking heretics for persecution. Arius and his followers face exile. Their books burn in public squares. The Christianity that emerges from Nicaea is not the diverse, chaotic movement of earlier centuries, but a unified institution with clear doctrines, hierarchical structure, and imperial backing. The transformation accelerates under Constantine's successors. Constantius II closes pagan temples and outlaws sacrifices. Julian the Apostate briefly attempts to restore the old gods, but his reign lasts only 20 months before a Persian spear ends both his life and his dreams of revival. The pagan restoration dies with him, and Christianity's triumph becomes irreversible. Theodosius I completes what Constantine began. The Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD makes Christianity the official religion of the empire. The Theodosian Code, issued a decade later, criminalizes all forms of pagan worship. Sacrifice becomes treason. Consulting oracles becomes sedition. The gods who once protected Rome are now enemies of the state. But laws alone cannot transform the heart of a civilization. The real work of conversion happens in the careful rebranding of the sacred calendar, the strategic absorption of pagan festivals, the gradual transformation of familiar celebrations into Christian observances. The Romans have always honored the birth of their sun god at the winter solstice, when light begins its victory over darkness. Now they celebrate the birth of Christ, the light of the world, on the same day. The festival feels familiar even as its meaning transforms. Spring celebrations of fertility and rebirth, when Persephone returns from the underworld and the earth awakens from winter's death, become the commemoration of Christ's resurrection. The goddess Ostara's eggs and rabbits, symbols of new life emerging from apparent death, serve the new faith as perfectly as they served the old. The Roman Lupercalia, with its wild races and fertility rituals, evolves into the feast of Saint Valentine. The Parentalia, when families honor their dead ancestors, becomes All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. Every pagan festival finds its Christian equivalent. Every sacred season receives new meaning while retaining familiar customs. The genius of this transformation lies not in what it destroys, but in what it preserves. The Romans continue to celebrate at the same times, in many of the same ways, but now they invoke Christ instead of Jupiter, Mary instead of Venus, saints instead of household gods. The old gods do not simply disappear, they undergo metamorphosis. Apollo's healing powers transfer to St. Luke the physician. Diana's protection of hunters becomes St. Hubert's patronage. The smith god Vulcan's mastery of fire transforms into St. Eligius's guardianship of metalworkers. Some pagan deities receive more dramatic transformations. Pan, the goat-footed god of wild places and sexual desire, becomes the image of Satan, complete with horns and hooves. The earth goddesses, who once blessed fertility, become dangerous witches who seduce men to damnation. The nature spirits who inhabited every grove and stream become demons to be exorcised by holy water and sacred words. Yet even in their demonization, the old gods maintain their power. Christians may fear demons, but they do not doubt their existence. The world remains populated by supernatural forces, still requires ritual protection, still responds to sacred words and blessed objects. The difference lies not in the presence of the supernatural, but in its interpretation. Christian emperors strip gold and silver from pagan temples, melting down statues of gods to mint coins bearing Christian symbols. But they do not destroy the buildings themselves, they consecrate them. The Pantheon, Rome's temple to all gods, becomes the church of Santa Maria Rotonda, the altar of victory, where senators swore loyalty to the old gods, gives way to Christian crosses. This architectural conversion carries profound symbolic weight. The spaces where Romans worshipped their ancestors continue to house worship, but now they serve the Christian God. The sacred geometry remains unchanged, only the prayers transform. Pagan priests find themselves faced with impossible choices. Some flee to remote corners of the empire where the old ways survive in secret. Others convert, bringing their knowledge of ritual and ceremony into Christian service. Many simply disappear into history, their names forgotten, their traditions buried. Yet the conversion of the masses proceeds more slowly than imperial decrees suggest. In the countryside, far from bishops and imperial agents, farmers continue to leave offerings at ancient shrines. Hunters invoke the old forest gods. Women in childbirth call upon goddesses who have protected births since time immemorial. Christian bishops understand that complete transformation requires generations, not years. They develop strategies of patient substitution, replacing pagan practices with Christian equivalents, rather than simply forbidding the old ways. Holy wells replace sacred springs. Saints' feast days eclipse divine celebrations. Christian pilgrimage sites emerge at locations long considered sacred. The process works both ways. Christianity absorbs pagan elements even as it transforms them. The virgin birth echoes similar stories told of divine heroes throughout the ancient world. The resurrection parallels mysteries of Dionysus, Mithras, and Osiris. The communion meal resembles the sacred banquets of numerous mystery religions. Christian art borrows freely from pagan imagery. Christ appears as a youthful Apollo, beardless and beautiful. Mary assumes the poses and attributes of Isis, the great mother goddess. Saints receive the symbols and powers of the gods they replace. This synthesis creates a Christianity that would seem foreign to the Jewish fishermen who first followed Jesus, but familiar to the Romans who now accept Christ as their Lord. The faith adapts to its new environment, like water taking the shape of its container, maintaining its essential nature while conforming to imperial expectations. By the end of the 4th century, the transformation is largely complete. The empire that once fed Christians to lions now builds churches in their honor. The gods who ruled for 1,000 years retreat to the shadows, their temples silent, their altars cold. Yet victory carries a price. The Christianity that emerges from this process bears little resemblance to the radical movement that once threatened imperial order. Instead of transforming the empire has transformed Christianity, turning it into another tool of imperial control. The bishops who once hid in catacombs now live in palaces. The faith that proclaimed the first shall be last now serves those who are very much first. The religion that promised to turn the world upside down has instead learned to keep it right side up. But the old spirits do not die easily. They retreat to the margins, to the wild places where Christian bells cannot reach, to the dreams and longings of people who remember when gods lived in every tree and stream. In the forests of Germania, in the mountains of Wales, in the remote islands of the north, the old ways survive. The sacred fires still burn, the ancient songs still echo, the gods still answer those who call upon their true names. The war between the old gods and the new has only begun. Christianity has won the cities and the palaces, but the countryside remains contested ground. The real battle will be fought not in council chambers and imperial courts, but in the hearts of common people who must choose between the gods of their fathers and the god of their emperors. In this contest, victory will belong not to the strongest, but to the most patient, not to those who destroy, but to those who transform what they cannot destroy. The mythic rebranding continues, and the final outcome remains unwritten in the stars. The bronze doors of the Serapeum crash to the marble floor with a sound like thunder, echoing through chambers that have housed sacred mysteries for 700 years. Christian monks pour through the breach, their black robes flowing like water through halls where philosophers once debated the nature of divine wisdom. In their hands, they carry hammers and axes, fire and holy water. Behind them comes Theophilus, Patriarch of Alexandria, his eyes burning with righteous fury as he surveys the greatest library of the ancient world. This is 391 AD. This is the day the ancient wisdom dies. The statue of Serapis towers above the destruction, 40 feet of ivory and gold, depicting the god who united Egyptian Osiris with Greek Zeus, the deity who promised resurrection to initiates of his mysteries. For centuries, pilgrims have knelt before this image, seeking healing for the sick, guidance for the lost, hope for those who mourn the dead. The god's serene face gazes down at the chaos with marble eyes that have witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. A monk named Marcus raises his hammer above his head. The crowd holds its breath, for ancient prophecy claims that if Serapis falls, the sky itself will collapse and the world will end in darkness. The hammer strikes. Ivory chips fly like stars. The god's face cracks but does not crumble. The sky does not fall. The world does not end. Instead, rats pour from the hollow statue, hundreds of them squeaking and fleeing as their nest is destroyed. The crowd erupts in laughter. The mighty Serapis, protector of the empire, defender of wisdom, guardian of the dead, nothing but a home for vermin. The destruction accelerates. Manuscripts burn in the courtyard, their smoke carrying away the collected wisdom of 1,000 years. Mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, philosophical dialogues, poetic masterpieces, all fuel for the purifying flames. The monks sing hymns as they work, their voices rising with the smoke toward a heaven that demands the obliteration of earthly knowledge. But the Serapeum is only the beginning. Across the empire, the systematic destruction of the sacred landscape unfolds like a carefully planned military campaign. Imperial edicts flow from Constantinople, each one tightening the noose around the neck of the old religions. The Codex Theodosianus reads like a death warrant for the ancient world. No person shall perform sacrifices, no person shall go around the temples, no person shall revere the shrines. The temples that have stood since the founding of cities face extinction. In Athens, the Parthenon, crown jewel of classical architecture, shrine to Athena the Wise, becomes the church of the Panagia Atheniotissa. Christian workers chip away the goddess's owl symbols, replacing them with crosses. The frieze depicting the birth of Athena from Zeus's head disappears beneath Christian frescoes, showing the nativity of Christ. The transformation is both architectural and metaphysical. Where once the virgin goddess Athena protected the city through wisdom and warfare, now the Virgin Mary offers salvation through suffering and prayer. The columns remain, the proportions endure, but the soul of the building has been surgically removed and replaced. In Rome itself, the Forum Romanum witnesses the slow strangulation of its ancient gods. The Temple of Vesta, where the sacred flame has burned for over 1,000 years, falls silent as the last Vestal Virgin, Coelia Concordia, is dismissed from her divine duties. The eternal fire dies for the first time since the founding of the city. The priestesses who have served as living goddesses, who could pardon criminals with a word, and whose purity protected the empire itself, disperse into obscurity. The Virgin's house becomes a Christian monastery. The circular temple, where the flame once danced, becomes a church dedicated to saints who never knew earthly love. The transformation is complete. Where once mortal women served as vessels for divine fire, now mortal men serve a God who demands celibacy as the price of holiness. But not all destruction comes through official decree. Christian mobs, drunk on righteousness and imperial approval, take matters into their own hands. In Antioch, they storm the temple of Apollo, smashing the god's golden lyre and burning the laurel groves where the Pythian oracle once spoke prophecy. The springs that bubbled with inspired waters are blessed with holy oil and renamed for Christian martyrs. The great temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, on Rome's Capitoline Hill, the symbolic heart of imperial power for 8 centuries, faces systematic dismantlement. Its massive bronze roof tiles are stripped to cover Christian basilicas. Its marble columns migrate to new churches throughout the city. The colossal statue of Jupiter, whose thunderbolts once protected the empire, is melted down to create crosses and church bells. Yet the stones remember. As Christian architects cannibalize pagan temples, they unknowingly preserve the sacred geometry that guided ancient builders. The Basilica of Santa Maria sopra Minerva rises directly atop Minerva's temple, its Christian altar positioned precisely where the goddess's statue once stood. The Church of San Clemente in Rome incorporates walls from a Mithraic temple, its foundation stones still humming with the power of the bull-slaying god. This architectural vampirism reveals the true genius of Christian conversion. Rather than simply destroying the old sacred spaces, the Church consumes them, absorbing their accumulated spiritual power while transforming their purpose. The people continue to worship in the same locations their ancestors considered holy, but now they address their prayers to Christ instead of Jupiter, to Mary instead of Diana. The process requires careful choreography. In Gaul, where Druids once performed sacred rituals beneath ancient oaks, Christian bishops plant their first churches in the same groves. They claim the trees are sanctified by the blood of martyrs, not the older truth that these spots have been holy since before memory. The Celtic sacred wells become Christian baptismal fonts. The standing stones that mark the intersection of earth and sky receive carved crosses that transform them into Christian monuments. In the Germanic territories beyond the Rhine, the destruction takes more violent forms. Saint Boniface, the apostle to the Germans, stands before the great oak of Donar at Geismar, the tree the local tribes believe connects earth to heaven. With his own hands, he takes an axe to the sacred trunk while terrified warriors watch from the forest shadows. The oak that has stood for centuries, that has witnessed 1,000 rituals, that houses the spirit of the thunder god himself, crashes to the earth with a sound like the world ending. But no lightning strikes the saint dead. No divine vengeance falls upon his head. The god's silence convinces the watchers that Thor has abandoned his sacred tree. From the oak's timber, Boniface builds a chapel dedicated to St. Peter. The wood that once housed a god now shelters Christian prayers. The tree's power flows into its new purpose, but under different management. The systematic erasure extends beyond individual temples to entire sacred landscapes. In Britain, where Roman civilization has collapsed and Saxon kingdoms rise from its ashes, Christian missionaries face the challenge of converting a people who never fully embraced Roman gods. Here, the old Celtic spirits still dance in stone circles older than Egypt, still speak in the whisper of wind through barrow mounds where ancient kings sleep. Augustine of Canterbury, sent by Pope Gregory to convert the Anglo-Saxons, receives explicit instructions. Do not destroy the temples of the idols, destroy the idols, but purify the buildings with holy water, erect altars, and deposit relics. The strategy is clear: transform, don't demolish. Let the people worship in familiar places while gradually shifting their allegiance to Christ. Avebury's Great Stone Circle, raised by Neolithic peoples 4,000 years before Christ, becomes a Christian village. Cottages nestle between the ancient megaliths like mushrooms growing at the base of trees. The standing stones that once marked the sacred pathways of sun and moon now serve as property boundaries and garden walls. Children play hide and seek among monuments their ancestors would have approached only in reverent awe, yet the stones retain their power. On certain nights when mist rises from the chalk downs and the modern world feels thin as paper, locals report seeing processions of robed figures moving between the ancient markers, performing rituals that predate Christianity by millennia. The old ceremonies continue in dreams and shadows, too deep to be fully eradicated by crosses and holy water. In Ireland, where Roman legions never marched and the Druids maintained their schools until the 5th century AD, the conversion takes subtler forms. St. Patrick does not destroy the sacred wells and fairy rings. He blesses them. The Hill of Tara, seat of the High Kings and axis of the Celtic cosmos, receives a wooden church that incorporates the ancient earthworks into its design. The goddess Brigid of the Forge and Healing Waters becomes Saint Brigid of Kildare, her sacred fire continuing to burn in Christian hands. Her holy well still grants healing to pilgrims, though they now credit Christ rather than the Celtic goddess. The transformation is so seamless that many never notice the substitution. Christian architects prove remarkably adept at absorbing pagan sacred geometry while claiming divine inspiration for their innovations. The circular churches that dot the European landscape echo the round temples of sun gods and earth goddesses. The cruciform basilica mirrors the cosmic cross that many ancient cultures saw in the intersection of earth and sky. The towers that reach toward heaven follow proportions first calculated by Egyptian priests and Babylonian astronomers. St. Sophia in Constantinople, greatest church of the Eastern Empire, rises upon foundations that once supported temples to Apollo and Artemis. Its massive dome seems to float unsupported, creating an interior space that medieval worshippers describe as a piece of heaven let down to earth. Yet the engineering principles that make this miracle possible derive from Roman concrete technology first developed for pagan temples. The Hagia Sophia's architects, Anthemius and Isidore, study not only Christian theology, but also the mathematical treatises of ancient Greece, the geometric principles preserved in Hermetic texts, the acoustic discoveries made in theatres dedicated to Dionysus. Their masterpiece synthesizes pagan wisdom and Christian vision into something entirely new, yet deeply rooted in the ancient world. Even as Christianity destroys the old temples, it cannot escape their influence. The very tools of destruction, architecture, mathematics, sacred geometry, carry the DNA of the civilizations being overthrown. The churches that rise from temple foundations speak in architectural languages developed to honor the gods they have displaced. The catacombs of Rome, once hideouts for persecuted Christians, become pilgrimage destinations where the faithful seek healing from saintly relics. But the paintings on catacomb walls reveal telling influences. Christ appears as Orpheus charming wild beasts with his lyre. Mary resembles Isis nursing her divine child. The Good Shepherd borrows poses from statues of Hermes, leading souls to the underworld. In the monasteries that rise throughout Europe, Christian scribes preserve classical texts they officially condemn. The same hands that copy out biblical commentaries also transcribe Ovid's erotic poetry, Virgil's epic tales, and Aristotle's natural philosophy. They claim to preserve these works only to refute them, but the preservation itself ensures that pagan wisdom survives the purge. The monastery libraries become arks carrying the genetic material of the ancient world into the Christian future. Hidden between theological treatises, the old gods wait in textual form for readers who will remember their true names. In the Christian East, where Byzantine power reaches into Asia and Africa, the destruction takes different forms. The oracle at Didyma, where Apollo spoke through his priests for over 1,000 years, falls silent when Christian officials forbid all forms of divination. The sacred springs that bubbled with prophetic inspiration are capped with marble slabs bearing crosses. In Egypt, the last temple of Isis at Philae closes its doors in 550 AD, ending 3,000 years of continuous worship. The hieroglyphic inscriptions that cover its walls become meaningless scribbles to a population that has forgotten how to read the sacred writing of their ancestors. The wisdom of ages dissolves into decoration. Yet even in destruction, transformation continues. The temple workers who once served Isis find employment in Christian monasteries. The techniques they developed for preserving mummies transfer to the preservation of saintly relics. The ritual knowledge they accumulated over millennia flows into Christian ceremony, carrying the old power in new vessels. By the 7th century, the transformation is largely complete. The ancient temples lie in ruins or serve Christian purposes. The sacred groves have been cleared for farmland or transformed into monastery gardens. The holy wells flow with water blessed in Christ's name. The old gods have been forgotten or transformed into demons and saints. But the stones remember everything. The marble columns that once supported statues of Zeus now hold up Christian altars, but they carry in their grain the memory of incense burned for the sky god. The foundation stones that anchored temples to the earth still connect the buildings above them to the telluric currents that ancient priests knew how to tap. The church has won a victory more complete than any military conquest. It has not only defeated the old gods, but absorbed their temples, their festivals, their sacred spaces, even their architectural secrets. The Christian empire rises upon the bones of the pagan world, using the skeleton of the old to support the flesh of the new. Yet in the deepest foundations, in the oldest stones, in the sacred geometry that guides all human attempts to touch heaven with earth, the ancient wisdom persists. The gods may be silent, but their power sleeps in the monuments that outlast empires, waiting for voices that remember their true names. The last Druid of Anglesey stands waist deep in the sacred pool, where generations of his predecessors cast golden torques into dark waters, offerings to gods whose names the Romans have forbidden him to speak. Moonlight turns the water silver around his robes as he lifts the final golden sickle, the blade that has cut mistletoe for 3 centuries. that has drawn the blood of willing sacrifices, that has carved Ogham runes into oak bark when the world was young. Behind him, the island burns. Christian monks have come with torches and axes, destroying the groves where Druids learned the secret names of trees, burning the libraries of living memory that took 20 years to acquire. The screams of his brother priests echo across the water, their wisdom dying with their flesh. This is 794 AD. This is the night the old knowledge bleeds to death in British soil. But the Druid does not weep. Instead, he speaks the words of power his teacher spoke, and his teacher's teacher before him, words that stretch back to the misty time when giants walked the earth and the gods lived openly among mortals. He commits to memory everything that burns behind him, every law, every genealogy, every healing song, every prophecy. Then he casts the golden sickle into the pool and walks into the forest, carrying the last ember of Celtic wisdom into the shadows, where it will smoulder for 1,000 years. The old gods do not die easily. They retreat to the margins, to the wild places where church bells cannot reach, to the dreams and rituals of common folk who remember when the world was full of spirits. In cottage gardens and forest clearings, at crossroads and holy wells, in the bones of ancient monuments and the whispered prayers of midwives, the old faith survives. In Alexandria, 500 years before the Druids' final ritual, the philosopher Hypatia walks through marble corridors where Euclid once taught geometry and Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference. She is the last keeper of the ancient wisdom, the final bridge between the classical world and the Christian future that seeks to destroy it. In her hands, she carries scrolls of Ptolemy's astronomy, Apollonius's mathematics, commentaries on Plato that reveal the hidden connections between mind and cosmos. The Christian mob finds her on a March morning in 415 AD, these monks and fanatics drunk on righteousness and the scent of burning books. They drag her from her chariot with hands that have never held anything more sacred than a prayer book. These men who see learning as witchcraft and a wisdom as temptation. In the church of Caesareum, where once stood the temple of Caesar Augustus, they strip her naked and scrape her flesh from her bones with oyster shells. The woman whose mind encompassed the movement of planets dies screaming as ignorance tears apart understanding. Her blood soaks into stones that remember the prayers of philosophers, the debates of scholars, the quiet conversations between teacher and student that built the foundation of human knowledge. With Hypatia's death, the last public voice of classical wisdom falls silent. But in the darkness that follows, other voices whisper the old truths. In the forests of Germany, where Charlemagne's armies have slaughtered the Saxon resistance and forcibly baptized the survivors, the old ceremonies continue in secret. At hidden groves deep in the Teutoburg forest, descendants of Arminius gather on the night of the winter solstice to honor Wotan and Freya, the gods who helped their ancestors destroy 3 Roman legions in these very woods. They no longer sacrifice white horses on stone altars. Such practices would bring death sentences from Christian judges. Instead, they leave bread and ale at the roots of ancient oaks, sing the old songs in voices barely above whispers, and teach their children the runes that Wotan won through his sacrifice on the world tree. By day, they attend Christian Mass and recite Latin prayers they do not understand. By night, they remember who they truly are. The Frankish kings understand that conversion imposed by sword edge remains skin deep. In the Capitulari de Partibus Saxoniae, Charlemagne decrees death for anyone who burns the dead according to pagan custom, who eats meat during Lent, who performs heathen sacrifices. But laws cannot reach into human hearts, and the heart remembers what the mind is forced to forget. In remote mountain valleys and islands cut off from imperial roads, entire communities maintain their ancient ways while paying lip service to the new faith. In Lithuania, the last officially pagan nation in Europe, sacred fires burn until 1387 AD at Vilnius. where priests of Pacunas tend flames that have illuminated Baltic nights since before the birth of Christ. Even after conversion, the Lithuanian nobles secretly maintain the sacred grove of Remuva, where oak trees older than memory shelter rituals that predate Christianity by 2 millennia. They sacrifice white stallions to ensure good harvests, consult the flight of sacred snakes to predict the future, and burn amber incense to carry prayers to the thunder god who splits the sky with his iron hammer. When Grand Duke Jogaila converts to Christianity to marry the Polish Queen Jadwiga, his subjects convert with him, at least in name. But in the deep forests, where wolves still hunt and bears still fish for salmon, the old altars remain wet with offerings. The Church understands that complete conversion requires more than legal decrees. It develops strategies of patient infiltration, replacing pagan practices with Christian substitutes so gradually that many never notice the transformation. The Feast of Lugnasad, when Celtic communities celebrated the first harvest, becomes Lammas, a Christian blessing of bread. The sacred wells, where Druids spoke with water spirits, become shrines to Christian saints who happen to specialize in healing. But the substitution works both ways. As Christianity absorbs pagan elements, paganism infects Christianity. The saints who replace the local gods carry more than their names. They inherit their powers, their personalities, their sacred spaces. Saint Brigid of Ireland possesses all the attributes of the Celtic goddess Brigid. She rules over smithcraft and poetry, healing waters and sacred fires. The transformation is so complete that medieval worshippers cannot tell where the goddess ends and the saint begins. In the Italian countryside, where Roman civilization has collapsed into feudal chaos, farmers still leave offerings for the Lares and Penates, the household gods who protect hearth and field. They call them Christian names now. Saint Anthony protects the livestock. Saint Agatha guards against fire. Saint Barbara shields the house from lightning. But the rituals remain unchanged. Bread and wine, flowers and coins, the ancient contract between mortal and divine that ensures the crops will grow and the animals will thrive. The Church tolerates these practices as long as they acknowledge Christian authority. Pope Gregory the Great writes to missionaries, "It is doubtless impossible to efface everything at once from their obdurate minds, because he who endeavors to ascend to the highest place rises by degrees or steps, and not by leaps." The strategy succeeds too well. By the 8th century, Christianity in rural areas has become so thoroughly paganized that church councils repeatedly condemn practices that sound more Druidic than Christian. The Synod of Rome in 745 AD forbids Christians from consulting soothsayers, wearing amulets, performing weather magic, or conducting divination rituals at sacred trees and stones. But the prohibitions multiply because the practices persist. In every generation, new councils issue new condemnations of the same old customs. The people hear the words, nod respectfully, and continue doing what their ancestors did. In the Pyrenees Mountains between Christian France and Islamic Spain, the Basque people maintain traditions that predate both religions. Their sacred sites scatter across mountain peaks where sky touches earth, where their ancestors built dolmens and stone circles when the world was young. They speak a language unrelated to any other on earth, sing songs that carry memories of the time before time. The Basque witches, Sorginak, gather at the cave of Zugaramurdi on the night of the full moon, where they mix Christian prayers with spells older than Latin, where they call upon both the Virgin Mary and Mari, the ancient mother goddess who lives beneath the mountain peaks. Their magic blends seamlessly. Holy water and blessed salt work alongside herbs gathered at sacred springs. Latin incantations mix with Euskera words of power that echo in caves deep as the earth's memory. The Spanish Inquisition will burn hundreds of these women in the 17th century, but their traditions survive because they have learned to hide in plain sight, to speak in Christian language while practicing pre-Christian power. In the Balkans, where the Byzantine Empire wrestles with Slavic invasions and the rising power of Islam, the old gods take on new disguises. The Rusalka, water spirits who drown unfaithful lovers, become vengeful saints who punish oath breakers. The Domovoi, household spirits who protect the family hearth, transform into guardian angels who watch over Christian homes. The Bogomils, a heretical Christian sect that spreads through Bulgaria and Bosnia, preach a dualistic theology that sounds suspiciously like ancient Zoroastrianism, filtered through Slavic shamanism. They reject the material world as the creation of an evil demiurge, seeking salvation through secret knowledge and mystical practices that their orthodox persecutors condemn as witchcraft. Their priests, called perfecti, live as ascetics who claim direct communion with divine light. They heal through laying on of hands, prophesy through visions, and teach that the true church exists not in buildings of stone, but in the purified souls of believers. When Byzantine armies and Orthodox priests hunt them through mountain forests, they vanish like smoke, their teachings preserved in songs and stories that sound like folk tales, but encode revolutionary theology. In Ireland, where St. Patrick's conversion was never as complete as Christian chronicles claim, the old ways survive through a brilliant strategy of synthesis. The Druids do not disappear. They become Christian monks, bringing their knowledge of law and history, their skills in poetry and prophecy, into the monastery schools. The Tanaist, the ancient Celtic law code, transforms into the Senchus Mór, Irish law interpreted through Christian principles but retaining its Druidic structure. The sacred groves become monastery gardens where monks tend herbs with healing properties the Druids discovered. The Ogham script, carved on standing stones to record Druidic wisdom, adapts to copy Christian manuscripts. Even the Irish creation myths absorb Christianity without losing their essential character. The Lebor Gabala Erin tells how the Tuatha De Danann, the divine tribe of the goddess Dana, became the Aos, the fairy folk who retreat to the hollow hills when mortals embrace the new faith. The gods do not die. They become the hidden people who emerge from their Sid mounds on Samhain night to reclaim their ancient sovereignty. The strategy succeeds so well that medieval Irish Christianity becomes almost unrecognizable to Roman observers. Irish monks practice forms of tonsure that echo Druidic traditions, calculate Easter by methods that follow Celtic astronomy, preserve myths and legends that celebrate gods the Church has officially condemned. In the remote Shetland Islands, where Norse colonists have maintained their own synthesis of Christian and pagan traditions, the old calendar survives alongside the new. Up Heli Ea, the fire festival that honours the end of Yule, continues to burn Viking longships, while Christian prayers sanctify the flames. The ceremony honours both Christ's light conquering darkness and the ancient sun, God's victory over winter. The island women practice a form of weather magic that blends runic knowledge with Christian symbolism. They sell winds to sailors in knotted ropes, 3 knots for a gentle breeze, 6 for a strong wind, 9 for a gale, while invoking both St. Nicholas, patron of seafarers, and Njord, the Norse god of favourable winds. The practice persists because it works. The women understand atmospheric pressure and wind patterns, knowledge passed down through generations of seafaring ancestors. Their magic succeeds not because they command supernatural forces, but because they read natural signs with precision their Christian neighbours cannot match. But the resistance carries a price. As Christianity consolidates its power, the penalties for practicing the old ways grow severe. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487, provides detailed instructions for identifying and prosecuting witches whose only crime is often the preservation of pre-Christian traditions. The witch trials that sweep across Europe from the 15th to 18th centuries target not just malevolent sorcery, but any practice that suggests allegiance to powers older than Christ. herbalists who know which plants heal and which harm find themselves accused of poisoning. Midwives who ease childbirth through traditional remedies face charges of trafficking with demons. Wise women who read fortunes in tea leaves or help neighbors find lost objects discover that their gifts mark them for the stake. Yet even under persecution, the traditions survive. They retreat further into shadow, disguising themselves more thoroughly, but they do not disappear. In Sicily, where Norman conquerors have imposed northern Christianity on a population that remembers Greek mysteries and Arab science, the Streghe practice a form of folk magic that seamlessly blends all three traditions. They invoke Santa Morte, Holy Death, a figure that combines the Christian memento mori with ancient goddesses of fate and transformation. Their rituals use holy water from Christian churches, oils blessed by Orthodox priests, and invocations in Arabic that echo Islamic prayers. The synthesis creates something entirely new, yet deeply rooted in the island's complex history. In the forests of Friuli, near the border between Italy and Austria, a secret society called the Benandanti emerges in the 16th century. These good walkers claim to battle witches in the spirit world every Thursday night, fighting with fennel stalks against the forces of evil to protect their community's crops and livestock. Inquisition records reveal that their practices derive from ancient shamanic traditions dressed in Christian language. The Benandanti speak of being born with calls, of spirit journeys to the land of the dead, of battles against malevolent spirits that threaten the harvest. Their leaders claim to serve both Christ and a mysterious goddess figure they call the Beautiful Lady, who teaches them the secret names of plants and the proper timing of agricultural rituals. The Inquisitors struggle to categorize these people who use Christian symbols, but practice techniques that predate Christianity by millennia. The Benandanti insist they serve God by fighting evil, but their methods echo the ecstatic practices of Siberian shamans and Celtic Druids. As the trials proceed, the Benandanti gradually adopt the Inquisitors' language, transforming their goddess into the devil and their protective magic into harmful witchcraft. The process reveals how persecution shapes not just behavior, but belief itself, forcing ancient traditions to conform to Christian categories even as they struggle to survive. By the 18th century, the old resistance has largely gone underground. The Enlightenment brings new forms of persecution, not the stake, but ridicule, not death, but dismissal as peasant superstition. The ancient wisdom that once shaped the understanding of nations becomes folklore. The sacred ceremonies that connected communities to cosmic cycles become quaint customs preserved for tourists. Yet still, the ember glows. In remote valleys where modern roads have not yet penetrated, in families that pass secrets mouth to ear from grandmother to granddaughter, in the dreams of children who see spirits in shadows and hear voices in the wind, the old knowledge persists. The gods have learned patience. They have discovered that exile teaches endurance, that shadow preserves what sunlight destroys, that the heart remembers what the mind is forced to forget. In hidden places, at the margins of maps, in the spaces between the official and the actual, the resistance continues. Not as armies marching behind banners, but as whispers in the dark, as flowers left at sacred wells, as the quiet certainty that beneath the Christian surface, older powers still move through the world. The war is not over. It has simply learned to fight with different weapons. In the scriptorium of Jarrow Monastery, Brother Bede dips his quill into oak gall ink and begins to write the history of a world that never existed. By candlelight that flickers against vellum pages, he crafts the tale of England's conversion, transforming bloody conquest into peaceful revelation, pagan wisdom into demonic delusion, ancient heroes into Christian saints. Each word he writes erases another fragment of memory. Each paragraph buries deeper the voices of those who knew the world before Christ. This is 731 AD. This is the night memory dies and history is born. The monk's pen scratches across sheepskin as he describes the coming of Augustine to Canterbury, making it sound like divine mission rather than cultural invasion. He writes of pagan kings who embrace Christ after witnessing miracles, of Druids who recognize truth when they hear it, of ancient temples willingly transformed into churches. The real story of resistance and rebellion, of forced conversion and cultural genocide, of wisdom lost and voices silenced, disappears beneath the weight of authorized narrative. Bede is not lying precisely. He believes every word he writes, for he has been trained from childhood to see the world through Christian eyes, to interpret every event as part of God's plan, to view the past as merely prologue to the triumph of the cross. He cannot imagine that the destroyed temples housed anything but error, that the silenced oracles spoke anything but falsehood, that the burned books contained anything but corruption. Yet even as he writes, older stories whisper beneath his Christian chronicle. In the margins of his manuscript, scribes add notes about local customs that refuse to die, about holy wells that grant healing, about standing stones where people still leave offerings. The official history flows across the page, but the living memory bleeds through like old ink, showing beneath new writing. Across Europe, in monasteries from Ireland to Italy, the great work of rewriting the world continues. Christian chroniclers labor by lamplight to transform pagan heroes into saints, ancient gods into demons, sacred sites into Christian landmarks. They work with the patience of archaeologists in reverse, not uncovering the past but burying it beneath layers of acceptable narrative. In Wales, where Celtic culture has retreated to mountain strongholds, the monks of Llangollen create the life of Saint Cadoc, transforming a local warrior king into a model of Christian virtue. They preserve his name and his deeds, but strip away everything that marks him as a product of the old world. The rituals he performed to ensure the land's fertility become acts of Christian charity. The battles he fought to protect sacred groves become crusades against pagan darkness. The transformation requires surgical precision. The chroniclers cannot simply invent new stories. Their audiences remember too much. Instead, they must carefully edit existing narratives, keeping the framework while replacing the meaning. Arthur, the British war leader who fought Saxon invaders, becomes a Christian king surrounded by Christian knights on a Christian quest. The cauldron of rebirth that restores dead warriors to life transforms into the Holy Grail that offers eternal salvation. In Ireland, where Druidic schools have become Christian monasteries, scholar monks perform an even more complex operation. They preserve the ancient myths and legends in writing for the first time, but they frame them as historical curiosities, stories from the time before truth arrived. The Táin Bó Cúailnge, the great cattle raid that echoes Bronze Age conflicts, becomes a tale of pre-Christian heroes who fought valiantly but lacked the light of Christ. The scribes add prologues explaining that these stories come from the time of ignorance, when people worshipped false gods and practiced dark magic. They present the myths as evidence of human folly before divine revelation, preserved not for their wisdom, but as cautionary tales. Yet in copying them down, they ensure the old stories survive, carrying within their lines the genetic code of a vanished worldview. In the monastery of St. Gallen, where Irish monks have brought their learning to the heart of Germanic territory, Brother Notker Lebeo translates classical texts into Old High German. He renders Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, Marcianus Capella's Marriage of Philology and Mercury, and fragments of Virgil's Aeneid. But his translations perform subtle alchemy, transforming pagan wisdom into Christian allegory. Where Boethius writes of Fortune's wheel and the classical virtues, Notker adds Christian commentary that interprets everything through biblical symbolism. The Roman gods become demons or angels. The classical underworld becomes either hell or purgatory. The ancient heroes become types of Christ or Antichrist. The words remain largely the same, but their meaning shifts like colors in changing light. The process accelerates as European universities replace the old Druidic schools and mystery academies. In Paris, where students from across Christendom gather to study theology and law, masters like Abelard and Aquinas create synthesis systems that incorporate classical learning while ensuring its submission to Christian doctrine. Aristotle's logic serves Christian theology. Plato's metaphysics supports Christian mysticism. Virgil's poetry becomes Christian allegory. The ancient wisdom survives, but only as servant to its conqueror, only as raw material for building a Christian intellectual edifice. The University of Paris issues regulations forbidding the teaching of certain classical texts, except with proper Christian commentary. Students may read Ovid's Metamorphoses, but only as allegory of the soul's transformation through grace. They may study Cicero's rhetoric, but only to better preach Christian truth. The ancient authors speak, but Christian interpreters provide their voices. In the cathedral schools of Chartres and Canterbury, educators develop techniques for reading classical texts correctly. They teach students to recognize the 4 levels of meaning in every story: literal, allegorical, moral, and anagogical. Through this hermeneutic lens, Homer's Odyssey becomes the soul's journey toward God. Virgil's Aeneid becomes Christ's descent into hell. Ovid's love poetry becomes the mystical marriage between the soul and its divine bridegroom. The system is brilliant in its thoroughness. It preserves the classical texts while ensuring they can only be understood through Christian categories. Students learn to read the ancient authors, but they learn to see them as unconscious prophets of Christian truth, as vessels for divine revelation they themselves could not fully comprehend. Yet, the old meanings resist complete translation. In the margins of manuscripts, students add glosses that reveal awareness of deeper layers. They note that Venus represents not just temptation, but also the creative power that generates all life. They observe that Apollo governs not just false prophecy, but also authentic poetic inspiration. They recognize that Dionysus embodies not just dangerous madness, but also the ecstatic experience that transcends ordinary consciousness. The glosses proliferate like a virus of memory, carrying forward fragments of understanding that official interpretation cannot quite eliminate. In scriptoriums from Oxford to Prague, copyists preserve not just the authorized text, but also alternative readings, variant traditions, suppressed interpretations that hint at meanings the Church has forbidden. The transformation of mythology proves more challenging than the rewriting of history. Gods and goddesses carry symbolic power that resists simple conversion into Christian equivalents. The solution emerges gradually: demonization for the dangerous, sanctification for the useful, allegorization for everything else. Pan, the goat-footed god of wild nature and unbridled sexuality, becomes the image of Satan himself. Medieval artists give the devil Pan's horns and hooves, his association with untamed forests and forbidden desires. The transformation is so complete that centuries later, Christians cannot imagine the devil looking any other way. But other transformations prove more subtle. Diana, the virgin huntress who protects women in childbirth, becomes conflated with the Virgin Mary in her role as protector of mothers. The goddess's sacred groves become Mary's shrine sites. Her silver bow becomes Mary's crescent moon. Her pack of hunting hounds becomes the angelic hosts that surround the Queen of Heaven. Bridget of Ireland undergoes the most seamless transformation of all. The Celtic goddess of smithcraft, poetry and healing waters simply acquires a saint's day and a Christian biography while retaining all her original attributes. Her sacred fire continues to burn at Kildare, tended now by Christian nuns instead of pagan priestesses. Her holy wells still grant healing. Her blessing still protects craftsmen and poets. The transformation is so successful that most Irish Christians never realize they are venerating a pre-Christian goddess. The rewriting extends beyond literature and theology to the very language people use to understand their world. Latin, the tongue of Christian scholarship, gradually displaces the vernacular languages that carry pre-Christian concepts. Words that once described complex spiritual realities find no equivalent in Christian Latin, and their meanings slowly drain away like water from a broken vessel. In Celtic languages, the word gias describes a sacred obligation that binds heroes to supernatural forces, a concept that has no Christian equivalent. As Irish and Welsh poets adopt Latin literary models, the geas transforms into the more familiar concept of vow or oath, losing its connection to the otherworld powers that once made it meaningful. Germanic concepts like word, the web of fate that connects all things, and hamingja, the luck spirit that follows family lines, have no parallels in Christian thought. As Germanic scholars write in Latin rather than their ancestral tongues, these concepts gradually fade from intellectual discourse, surviving only in folk poetry and peasant superstition. The loss of language becomes loss of thought itself. When the vocabulary for expressing pre-Christian ideas disappears from educated discourse, the ideas themselves become literally unthinkable for educated people. The mental categories that once organized human understanding of the sacred simply cease to exist for those who think in Christian terms. Yet poetry proves more resistant to transformation than prose. In the verse romances that emerge in the 12th and 13th centuries, the old stories resurface wearing Christian costume but retaining their essential structure. The Matter of Britain, Arthurian romance, preserves Celtic mythology in the language of Christian chivalry. The Grail quest echoes the ancient Celtic journey to the otherworld, where heroes seek magical cauldrons that restore life to the dead. The Round Table mirrors the sacred circles where Celtic warriors bound themselves in brotherhood. The Fisher King, whose wound prevents the land's healing, recalls ancient myths of kings whose health mystically connects to their territory's fertility. Chrétien de Troyes and his successors create narratives that satisfy Christian audiences while smuggling pre-Christian wisdom past ecclesiastical censors. Knights quest for Christian relics, but encounter fairy mistresses and magical castles that belong to the older world. They serve a Christian king, but follow codes of honor that echo Germanic warrior culture. The vernacular poets working in French, German, and English prove even bolder in their preservation of pagan elements. The anonymous author of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight creates a romance that is Christian in setting but thoroughly pagan in its understanding of nature's power and the relationship between civilization and wildness. The Green Knight himself, vegetation deity who dies and is reborn, challenger who tests heroes through supernatural ordeals, would be instantly recognizable to any Celtic druid. Yet he appears in a Christian court, issues his challenge during a Christian feast, and the poem frames his testing of Gawain in terms of Christian morality. In the German Nibelungenlied, Christian scribes preserve the ancient Germanic heroic cycle while adding Christian elements to make it acceptable to medieval audiences. Siegfried remains a dragon-slaying hero whose strength comes from bathing in monsters' blood, but the poem adds prayers and religious references that domesticate the pagan wildness of the original story. The process reveals the fundamental tension in medieval Christianity's relationship with its pre-Christian heritage. The Church needs the authority and antiquity of classical culture to support its own claims to universal truth, but it also fears the alternative vision of reality that classical literature preserves. The solution emerges in the doctrine of preparatio evangelica, the idea that pagan wisdom unconsciously prepared the world for Christian revelation. Classical authors become unwitting prophets of Christ, their insights partial glimpses of truths that Christianity reveals completely. Virgil, author of the Aeneid, becomes a Christian prophet because his fourth eclogue speaks of a child who will usher in a golden age. Medieval readers interpret this as prophecy of Christ's birth, making Virgil an honorary Christian despite his historical paganism. Dante places him in limbo with other virtuous pagans who achieved salvation through natural reason rather than divine revelation. The reinterpretation allows Christian scholars to preserve classical learning while claiming it for Christianity. They can study Aristotle and Plato, Homer and Virgil, without admitting that pagan cultures produced wisdom equal to or superior to Christian insight. The ancient authors become unconscious Christians, their work preparation for the gospel rather than alternative to it. But alternative readings persist in the margins, in vernacular poetry, in folk traditions that remember meanings the official interpretation has suppressed. In the universities themselves, students discover that classical texts carry meanings their Christian teachers cannot fully contain. The rise of scholasticism in the 13th century creates a new problem. As Christian theology becomes more sophisticated and systematic, it must grapple more directly with classical philosophy. Thomas Aquinas' synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy and Christian doctrine succeeds brilliantly, but it also reveals the extent to which Christian thought depends on pagan foundations. The more thoroughly Christian thinkers absorb classical learning, the more classical modes of thought penetrate Christian consciousness. Aquinas may baptize Aristotle, but in doing so, he also Aristotelianizes Christianity, introducing concepts and methods that subtly alter the faith they are meant to serve. By the 14th century, the intellectual synthesis has largely succeeded. European culture appears thoroughly Christianized, its literature and learning organized around Christian principles, its art and architecture dedicated to Christian themes. The ancient gods seem to have been fully converted into saints and demons, the old stories completely transformed into Christian allegories. Yet beneath the Christian surface, older currents continue to flow. In the universities, students read classical texts and discover meanings their professors discourage. In the vernacular literature, poets preserve mythic patterns that resist Christian interpretation. In folk culture, practices and beliefs that predate Christianity by millennia continue under Christian names. The Great Rewriting has succeeded in transforming the official culture, but it has not fully penetrated to the level where stories and symbols shape human understanding. There, in the deep structures of narrative and image, in the patterns that organize how people think about heroism and love, death and transformation, the old wisdom persists. The mind remembers what the memory is forced to forget. In dreams and poetry, in the logic of story and the rhythm of ritual, the ancient understanding survives, waiting for readers who can recognize the older text that shows through the palimpsest of Christian revision. The war for human consciousness continues, fought now not with swords and fire, but with words and images, interpretations and reinterpretations, in the endless struggle between official meaning and unofficial memory. The archaeologist's trowel scrapes against stone in the shadow of Canterbury Cathedral, revealing carved faces that should not exist in this holiest of Christian places. Green men peer from capitals and corbels, their mouths streaming leaves and vines, their eyes holding secrets older than the Gospels. Oak and ivy pour from their lips like ancient prophecy, reminding all who have eyes to see that the old gods never truly died. They merely learned to hide in plain sight. Above the diggers, morning light filters through stained glass windows, where St. Thomas Becket kneels in martyrdom. But carved in the shadows beneath the altar, older figures dance their eternal rounds. The wild hunt rides across medieval stonework while congregations sing hymns unaware that pagan spirits gallop overhead. In this cathedral, as in hundreds of others across Europe, Christian architecture shelters pre-Christian souls. This is the present day. This is how the ancient war ends. Not with victory or defeat, but with assimilation so complete that victor and vanquished become indistinguishable. The Green Man watches from every major cathedral in Christendom. Chartres and Cologne, Durham and Salisbury, Notre Dame and Winchester, all bear his face carved in stone by Christian craftsmen who called themselves servants of Christ, but preserved in their work the most primal of pagan symbols. The foliate head that speaks the language of growing things, that embodies the life force flowing through all creation, that proclaims the divinity of nature itself. This forbidden god hides where bishops and archbishops celebrate Mass daily, unseen because he has become invisible. The stonemasons who carved these faces worked in guild traditions that stretched back to the temple builders of ancient Egypt and Babylon. They carried in their hands not just the techniques of shaping stone, but the symbolic knowledge of sacred geometry, the understanding that buildings are more than mere shelter. They are cosmological diagrams rendered in marble and limestone, sacred spaces where heaven touches earth. In the Cathedral of Saint-Denis, where the Gothic style first reached toward heaven, the master builders encoded proportion systems based on the golden ratio, the mathematical relationship that ancient Greeks considered the divine proportion. The same numbers that guided the Parthenon's architects also determined the heights of Gothic arches, the spacing of flying buttresses, the dimensions of rose windows through which light streams like divine revelation. But the light that fills these Christian spaces carries frequencies older than Christ. The rose windows bloom with mandalas that echo the cosmic diagrams of Hindu and Buddhist temples. The labyrinth patterns carved into Neolithic chambers. The solar symbols painted in caves where shamans communed with spirits 40,000 years ago. The medieval glaziers who assembled these windows in lead and light, preserved in colored glass, the visual vocabulary of humanity's oldest spiritual insights. Walk into any ancient church in Europe and you walk into a palimpsest where Christian prayers echo over pagan foundations. The Church of San Clemente in Rome stands atop a Mithraic temple, where Roman soldiers once shared bread and wine in communion with the unconquered sun. The crypt still bears frescoes of the bull-slaying god, his eyes turned toward the same eternal light that Christian mystics seek in their prayers above. In England, churches rise from sites where stone circles marked the sacred landscape for millennia before Christ. Knowlton Church in Dorset sits precisely in the centre of a Neolithic henge, its Norman walls embracing Bronze Age earthworks, with the unconscious recognition that some places demand worship regardless of which gods receive the prayers. The Christian calendar preserves the rhythm of agricultural festivals that organized human time since the invention of farming. Christmas lights blaze against December darkness exactly when European peoples have always celebrated the return of the sun. The date has nothing to do with the historical birth of Jesus. It has everything to do with the winter solstice, when light begins its victory over darkness in the eternal cosmic drama that every culture has honored since humans first looked up at stars. December 25th carried sacred significance millennia before the first gospel was written. Mithras was born on this date, emerging from rock to bring divine light to the world. Sol Invictus claimed this day as his birthday when the unconquered sun renewed his strength for the coming year. The Egyptian Horus, the Mesopotamian Tammuz, the Greek Helios, all solar deities whose births coincided with the turning of the year, whose stories Christianity absorbed and transformed while preserving their essential timing. The Christmas tree stands in Christian homes as the world tree of Germanic mythology, the cosmic axis that connects earth to heaven, its lights representing the stars that dance around the pole of the sky, the evergreen that defies winter's death, the tree that stays green when all other growing things have died. This is Yggdrasil, the ash tree on which Odin hung himself to win the runes, the axis mundi around which the 9 worlds revolve. Children hang stockings by the fireplace to receive gifts from Santa Claus, never knowing they participate in rituals older than writing. The shamanic figure who travels between worlds, who descends through the smoke hole of the cosmic tent, who brings gifts of wisdom and transformation, This is the archetype that underlies every gift-giving mythology, from Siberian reindeer herders to Scandinavian storytellers. The reindeer that pull his sleigh across the sky carry the solar symbolism of the great stag, whose antlers represent the sun's rays, whose annual death and rebirth mirror the vegetative cycle. The chimney through which Santa enters houses echoes the world tree through which shamans journey to the spirit realm, the sacred passage that connects the hearth of human life to the cosmic fire that warms all creation. Easter preserves even more obvious pagan elements beneath its Christian veneer. The holiday takes its name from Ostara, the Germanic goddess of spring and fertility, whose symbols of eggs and rabbits represent the life force awakening after winter's death. The date shifts with the moon because it follows the ancient lunar calendar that governed agricultural peoples, the same calendar that determined when Persephone returned from the underworld to bring spring to the waiting earth. The Easter egg carries the cosmic symbolism of the world egg, from which all creation emerges, the Orphic egg that contained the universe before it hatched into being. Children hunt for these symbols in gardens where flowers bloom, participating in mystery dramas that reenact the finding of Persephone, the return of Inanna, the resurrection of Osiris, all the dying and rising gods whose stories Christianity claimed as uniquely its own. Halloween maintains its connection to the Celtic New Year more explicitly than any other festival. On Samhain night, when the veil between worlds grows thin, children dress as spirits and demand treats from neighbours who recognise, however unconsciously, the ancient obligation to feed the returning dead. The jack-o'-lantern glows with the spirit light that guides souls back to the world of the living, while carved turnips and pumpkins serve as vessels for the homeless ghosts who wander between the realms. The modern revival of interest in these ancient festivals reveals how thoroughly Christian interpretation has failed to satisfy human spiritual hunger. Increasing numbers of people recognize that their deepest celebrations have roots that stretch far deeper than the official religion, that their most meaningful rituals connect them to seasonal cycles and natural rhythms that no theology can fully explain or contain. In the countryside of Europe, where ancient practices die slowly, folk customs preserve fragments of pre-Christian understanding with remarkable fidelity. May Day celebrations still honor the returning fertility of the earth, as villagers dance around poles that represent the world tree, as young couples spend the night in forests where they enact the sacred marriage between Sky Father and Earth Mother. The Morris dancers who leap and spin through English villages on May morning preserve choreographies that encode astronomical observations, seasonal transitions, and ritual dramas that predate Christianity by thousands of years. Their bells and ribbons, their blackened faces and antlered headdresses mark them as practitioners of mysteries they themselves may not fully understand, but continue to embody with precise fidelity. In Ireland and Scotland, where Celtic culture never completely surrendered to Roman or Saxon conquest, the old calendar persists alongside the Christian one. Lugnasad becomes Lammas, Samhain becomes All Hallows Eve, Imbolc becomes Candlemas. But the underlying agricultural rhythm remains unchanged. The quarter days and cross-quarter days that mark the Celtic year continue to organize rural life, determining when to plant and when to harvest, when to breed animals, and when to preserve food for winter. The sacred wells that dot the Celtic landscape still receive offerings from pilgrims who may not remember the goddesses to whom they originally belonged. Coins and flowers, ribbons and written prayers accumulate at these springs where water emerges from the earth's depths, where the boundary between visible and invisible worlds grows permeable, where healing flows from sources deeper than any human understanding. At Glastonbury, where Joseph of Arimathea supposedly brought the Holy Grail, the red spring and white spring flow as they have for millennia, their iron-rich and calcium-rich waters representing the blood and milk of the great goddess, the red and white streams that symbolize life and death, passion and purity, the dual nature of existence itself. Christian pilgrims drink from these wells seeking healing in Christ's name, while pagan practitioners honor the ancient goddess who was old when the world was young. The landscape itself preserves the memory of sacred geography that Christianity could transform but never fully erase. Ancient trackways still connect megalithic sites across vast distances, following alignments that mark the rising and setting of significant stars, that trace the paths of solar and lunar cycles across the earthly terrain. The old straight track that Alfred Watkins mapped across the English countryside reveals a sacred geography based on astronomical observation and terrestrial energy, a network of power places that organize the spiritual life of pre-Christian Britain. Stonehenge draws millions of visitors annually, most of whom sense but cannot articulate the numinous power that radiates from these ancient stones. The monument predates Christianity by 3,000 years, yet it continues to function as a sacred space where people gather to witness solstices and equinoxes, to participate in ceremonies that connect them to cosmic cycles, to experience directly the relationship between human consciousness and celestial movement. The archaeological revelations of recent decades have transformed understanding of European prehistory, revealing sophisticated civilizations that flourished millennia before the first Christian missionaries arrived. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to 9600 BC, proves that monumental religious architecture predates agriculture itself, that the human impulse to create sacred space motivated the first urban settlements, that temple building drove the development of civilization rather than following it. The discovery of the Nebra sky disk in Germany, a Bronze Age artifact that maps stellar constellations with astronomical precision, demonstrates that European peoples possessed sophisticated scientific knowledge 20 centuries before Greek philosophy emerged. The disk shows that ancient Europeans understood the relationship between solar and lunar cycles, that they tracked stellar movements with mathematical accuracy, that they embedded astronomical observations in religious artifacts, that served both practical and spiritual purposes. These archaeological discoveries reveal the poverty of Christian accounts that portrayed pre-Christian Europeans as ignorant barbarians worshipping crude idols. The monuments and artifacts preserve evidence of sophisticated theological systems, complex ceremonial practices, and profound insights into the relationship between human consciousness and cosmic order. In modern city gardens, ancient plant wisdom persists in herbalism that grandmother taught to granddaughter across generations, that paid lip service to Christian doctrine while preserving deeper knowledge. The women who know which plants heal and which harm, who understand the proper timing for gathering medicines, who recognize the spiritual properties of growing things. They carry forward the tradition of the wise women, the herbalists, the village healers who served their communities for millennia before doctors claimed monopoly over the healing arts. The revival of interest in plant medicine, in permaculture and organic farming, in seasonal eating and lunar planting, reveals how thoroughly modern civilization has lost connection with the natural rhythms that sustained human culture until the Industrial Revolution severed the bonds between human life and natural cycles. Contemporary neo-pagan movements attempt to reconstruct ancient practices from fragmentary evidence, but their efforts often reveal how much has been irrevocably lost. The unbroken chain of oral tradition that once transmitted the deepest mysteries from teacher to student was severed centuries ago, leaving only scattered fragments that must be pieced together like pottery shards from an archaeological dig. Yet even fragmentary knowledge carries power. The young people who gather in forests to celebrate the full moon, who mark the solstices with fire and song, who seek direct relationship with natural forces, they are rediscovering experientially what their ancestors knew intellectually, that human consciousness is part of a larger web of awareness that includes the consciousness of trees and stones, rivers and mountains, the whole living earth that breathes and dreams and remembers. The environmental crisis that threatens planetary survival has forced recognition that the worldview which sees nature as dead matter to be exploited has led to ecological disaster. The ancient understanding that sees the earth as a living being, that recognizes consciousness in all forms of existence, that approaches the natural world with reverence rather than domination. This wisdom seems less primitive and more prophetic with each passing year. In quantum physics and ecology, in neuroscience and consciousness research, contemporary science approaches insights that shamans and mystics have preserved for millennia. The recognition that observer and observed are inseparably connected, that consciousness and matter interpenetrate at every level, that the universe itself may be a form of cosmic consciousness. These discoveries point toward the animistic worldview that Christianity spent centuries trying to eradicate. The old gods never died. They retreated to the unconscious depths where they continued to shape human psychology, where they influenced art and literature, where they preserved in symbolic form the perennial wisdom that each generation must rediscover for itself. Jung's archetypes are the gods by another name, the eternal patterns that organize human experience, the mythic forces that drive individual development and cultural evolution. In dreams and fantasies, in poetry and painting, in the stories that capture popular imagination, the ancient myths continue to unfold with undiminished power. Star Wars retells the hero's journey that guided Odysseus home from Troy. Lord of the Rings preserves Celtic and Germanic mythology for readers who have forgotten their ancestral traditions. Harry Potter introduces children to shamanic practices disguised as fantasy magic. The success of these contemporary myths reveals how hungry modern consciousness remains for connection to the numinous realm, for participation in stories larger than individual existence, for initiation into mysteries that transform ordinary awareness into direct perception of the sacred dimension that interpenetrates all existence. The secret war between paganism and Christianity ends not with victory or defeat, but with synthesis. The deepest insights of both traditions flow together in the emerging global consciousness that recognizes the earth as a living system, that honors the diversity of spiritual paths, that seeks direct experience of the sacred rather than mediation through institutional authority. The old gods speak in new voices. The ancient wisdom emerges in contemporary forms. The perennial mysteries adapt to modern consciousness while preserving their essential teaching. That existence is sacred, that all life is interconnected, that human beings are not separate from nature, but expressions of the cosmic consciousness that dreams the universe into being. In stone circles and Gothic cathedrals, in forest groves and city gardens, in the hearts of all who remember that the earth is holy and life is sacred, the gods continue their eternal dance. They wait patiently for humans to remember their true names, to recognize their living presence, to join once again in the cosmic celebration that has been dancing since the stars first sang together in the darkness before dawn. The war is over, the mystery endures, the dance continues, and in the spaces between the words, in the silence that holds all songs, the ancient music plays on, calling the children home to the garden where the tree of life still grows, where the waters of wisdom still flow, where the fire of consciousness still burns with the light that was before the beginning and will be after the end.